There is a moment just after dawn when the light hits the Giza plateau, and the Great Pyramids seem less like tombs and more like promises. They were built to declare that something could last forever, a kingdom, a king, a cosmic order. For 500 years that promise held. But what happens when the river that makes stone mountains possible begins to shrink? What happens when the voice of the God King in his palace at Memphis no longer carries to the provinces? The age of the pyramid builders did not end with a bang. It ended in the silence of a low flood and the quiet murmur of local lords learning to ignore a distant throne. To stand at the base of Khufu's Great Pyramid is to feel the weight of that promise. Each side of its base runs for 230 meters. It once soared to a height of nearly 147. 2.5 million blocks of stone, a total mass of 6 million tons, shaped into a near-perfect mountain. This was not magic. This was management. It was the product of a civilization utterly mastered by a single idea and powered by a single river. The Nile was the kingdom's circulatory system. Every year its floodwaters renewed the black soil of the fields and filled the canals that acted as highways. Upon this predictable pulse, the court at Memphis, near modern Cairo, built a machine of incredible precision. We have a stunningly personal glimpse into this machine found on papyri at a Red Sea port called Wadi al-Jarf. It is the work log of a foreman named Merer, from the 27th year of King Khufu's reign. Merer doesn't speak of gods or glory, he speaks of logistics. He records day by day how his crew of 40 men would sail to the quarries at Tura, load their boats with brilliant white limestone, and navigate a network of canals to the Giza construction site, a place they called Akhet Khufu, the horizon of Khufu. He notes opening dikes to raise the water level. He logs multi-day trips. This is the human voice of the Pyramid Age, organized, methodical, and concerned with getting the job done. This was a state that could move anything. Granite for a king's sarcophagus made a 900-kilometer journey downriver from Aswan. Cedar for temple doors sailed across the Mediterranean from Byblos. Copper and turquoise were hauled from mines deep in the Sinai. All of it flowed to the center, recorded and redistributed by a literate bureaucracy whose work we can still see, carved in the tomb of an official named T at Saqqara, showing endless lines of cattle, scribes with their pallets, and boat builders shaping acacia wood into the vessels that held the kingdom together. What drove this engine? It was an idea called Maat, the Egyptian concept of order, truth, balance, and justice. The universe was born with Maat, but it was always threatened by chaos. The king's primary duty was to maintain it. Building a pyramid wasn't just a vanity project, it was a cosmic stabilization effort. It was a national project that focused the kingdom's resources, affirmed the king's power, and reinforced the order he embodied. This ideology powered the labor system. The men who built the pyramids were not slaves. They were Egyptians performing a national service, a form of taxation paid in labor called the corvée. For a few months of the year, especially during the inundation when farming was impossible, teams of men from across the country would report for duty. They were housed in purpose-built towns, like Hayt el Gharab at Giza. They were fed, and fed well. Bakery and brewery remains show they received daily rations of 8 to 10 loaves of bread and multiple jugs of beer. They received medical care. This was an organized, state-supported workforce, a seasonal army of builders who turned their slack time into eternity. This system reached its zenith in the 4th dynasty with the Giza pyramids. By the 5th dynasty, the focus shifted slightly. Kings like Sahure and Djoser turned their gaze upward to the sun god, Ra. They built spectacular and unique monuments at a site called Abu Sir, sun temples. These were not dark enclosed shrines but vast open-air courts centered on a massive squat obelisk called a benben, designed to catch the first and last rays of the sun. They were cosmic altars, connecting the king directly to the most powerful force in the sky. Their temple reliefs show the fruits of a confident kingdom, ships returning heavy with Lebanese cedar, and depictions of captured Libyan and Asiatic peoples, a reminder of Egypt's dominance. And then, at the end of the dynasty, around 2350 BCE, King Unas made a final indelible mark on eternity. Inside his modest pyramid at Saqqara, he commissioned the first pyramid texts. For the first time, the stone walls of the burial chamber were not silent. They were covered, from floor to ceiling, with hundreds of carved hieroglyphic spells, more than 700 distinct utterances. These were resurrection machines, words of power meant to protect the king from death, to help him navigate the underworld, and to ensure his ascent to the heavens to sail with Ra in his solar bark. The promise was no longer just in the stone's shape, it was written into its very skin. And then came the long, slow sunset. Pepi II came to the throne of the 6th dynasty as a child and stayed there for a lifetime. The ancient historian Manetho gives him a reign of 94 years. Modern scholars favor a still extraordinary 60 to 70 years. A long reign sounds like stability, but it can be a subtle poison. A king who rules for so long outlives not just his children and grandchildren, but the institutional memory of his own government. He outlives his most capable officials, replacing them with their less experienced sons. Over decades, the central administration can grow stiff, complacent. The great ship of state drifts, slowly, off course. While Memphis aged, the provinces grew strong. The governors of the districts, the nomarchs, began to turn their appointed offices into hereditary fiefdoms. Power, land, and loyalty began to collect around local families, not the distant crown. You can see their confidence carved into the cliff faces at sites like Beni Hassan and Asyut. They excavated grand tombs for themselves, decorated with scenes of their personal wealth, their personal armies, and their personal authority. The message was clear. In this valley, we are the ones who matter. We keep the peace. We fill the granaries. At the same time, the crown was being slowly strangled by its own piety. Every pyramid and temple ever built was endowed with vast estates of tax-exempt agricultural land, complete with workers and priests, all dedicated to maintaining the cult of the dead king. Over generations, this meant that more and more of Egypt's productive land was taken off the books, its revenue flowing to the dead, not the living. The ghosts of past kings were eating the budget of the present one. The generosity of Pepi's ancestors had weakened the very hand that was supposed to rule. A long-reigning king, powerful local lords, and a hollowed-out treasury. The system was brittle. Then it received a shock. Around 2200 BCE, paleoclimatologists have identified a severe and prolonged period of drought that gripped the northern hemisphere, often called the 4.2 kiloyear event. For Egypt, this meant one thing: a series of low Nile floods. No direct flood records from the Old Kingdom survive, but climate proxies from cave stalagmites in the Levant to sediment cores in the Nile Delta all tell the same story of aridification. A low flood meant less land was inundated, less fertile silt was deposited. Harvests shrank. surpluses vanished. A strong, centralized state might have weathered a few bad years. But this was a state whose foundations were already cracked. When Pepi II finally died, around 2184 BCE, the system fractured. A series of short-lived, ephemeral kings followed, some ruling for little more than a year. They left behind few monuments. The great national project of pyramid building sputtered and died. With the central treasury weak and the Nile floods unreliable, provinces that had once looked to Memphis for orders and support now simply looked to themselves. The promise of the center was broken. What did this collapse look like on the ground? We hear the voice of a nomarch from south of Thebes named Ankhtifi. On his tomb walls, he boasts that during a time of great famine, he fed his own district. He claims that when the rest of Upper Egypt was starving, his people had food. He boasts of his military prowess, of pacifying his neighbors. It is self-serving propaganda, but it is propaganda that reveals a terrifying truth. The world had shrunk. Your survival now depended not on the god-king in Memphis, but on the local strongman with soldiers and grain silos. Ankhtifi's tomb is a resume for a world without a center. Egypt split in two. The Old Kingdom gave way to what we call the First Intermediate Period. A new royal line, the 9th and 10th dynasties, established itself at Herakleopolis in the north, controlling the Nile Delta. In the south, a family of powerful nomarchs in Thebes, the Intefs, consolidated their rule over the upper valley, eventually declaring themselves kings as the 11th dynasty. For over a century, two Egypts existed, skirmishing along a shifting border, vying for control of the fractured land. The one voice from Memphis was gone, replaced by the clash of regional powers. As power decentralized on earth, so too did access to heaven. The exclusive royal pyramid texts evolved. Spells once reserved for the king alone were adapted, edited, and painted onto the wooden coffins of wealthy officials. We call these the coffin texts. The promise of resurrection and eternal life among the gods was no longer a royal monopoly. The afterlife had been, in a sense, democratized, available to anyone who could afford the right coffin and the right scribe. This profound religious shift mirrored the new political reality. The end of the division came with war. Around 2055 BCE, the Theban king Mentuhotep II launched a final campaign, defeated the rulers of Herakleopolis, and reunified Egypt. The Middle Kingdom was born. But it was a new Egypt, one that remembered the chaos. Its kings would rule with a tighter grip on the provinces, and its art and literature were infused with a new sense of realism, even pessimism. The great lesson had been learned. Today, the stone mountains still stand. We can read Merer's logbook and hear the rhythm of the work crews. We can stand in Unis's pyramid and see the words meant to conquer death. And we can visit the proud tombs of the nomarchs and feel the pull of the periphery against the center. The Old Kingdom teaches us a plain lesson. Even the most permanent-seeming structures rest on fragile foundations, on the annual mercy of a river, on grain in a jar, on a shared belief in the center. When the climate shifted and the politics fractured, the promise in stone was broken. The Old Kingdom did not shatter, it simply could not hold. The story of the Old Kingdom is a reminder that no civilization is eternal. Here at Dustkings, we explore these moments of collapse, one empire at a time, staying grounded in the historical record. If you value this approach to the past, tap subscribe and join us for our next journey into the ruins. The pyramids endure, catching the sun just as they did 4,500 years ago. But they carry a warning. Stone can look like forever, but it is not. Its strength depends on the flood and on the delicate balance of power, belief, and bread. This is Dustkings. If this story brought the past to life for you, a like and a subscribe help us build the next one. Until then, walk gently among old stones.